He's described really as being short, sharp-featured, but as a youth, when he led those people, he obviously exuded some sort of charm that drew people to him. In a vision, Francis heard Jesus tell him to rebuild his church. At the time, he was praying in a little dilapidated, falling down chapel, and he took it very literally and went round and collected bricks and blocks and mortar and this type of thing.
And what year was this when he had that experience?
Round about it was early 12th, 13th century.
So 1200 and something?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And he started repairing the church quite physically and literally. And it was only as time went on, people started investigating what this funny little man was doing, that he realised that people were coming to help him. And even at that stage, people were drawn to him as he carried out what he thought was God's will for him. But in fact, it was the whole body of the church that was his task to rebuild. It was a time when there was a lot of less than desirable things going on around in the church, and his task was to rebuild it. There are many stories that record his actions, and frequently they sound rather extreme, and he was a bit of an extremist. He didn't do things by halves, he was impetuous, and he went into things wholeheartedly. Today there will be many services around the world, really, for the blessing of animals as they remember his love for creation. We had one here last year, and it was a great service, but we couldn't quite see how it would combine with a big breakfast, so hence the soft toys that really represent those animals anyway in so many ways. And it's not only babies and children that love them, but also the adults as well. Many adults have a soft toy that's tucked away, a memory of something else earlier on. Francis believed that the task of all creation, human or animal, was to live their life fully, using every ability and talent they had as well as they could. That meant for the birds, he expected them that they would sing beautifully, and they would give thanks in their singing for the fresh air that gave them a lift to their wings so they could fly, and they would delight all the people that heard them. A lamb should grow its fleece and hop around the field, and its fleece could be used in clothing for people. People should live caring for one another, and caring and respecting the creatures and the environment, not owning so much as holding things in trust for generations to come and for God's creation in the world itself. However, Francis' love of animals was just one aspect of a very complex person. It was to all creation that Francis was drawn. Yes, animals, but also people. His compassion was from the outcast, for the poor and the rich, the leper and the wrongdoer, and the lord of the manor and the mayor. For all people, for the bishops that while he saw so much wrong with the church in his day, he always gave respect to them because of their call by God to serve. He refused to be an enemy of anyone, and he could regard nobody as an enemy of his. He was often at odds with authority. His radical and impetuous ways challenged people. But even when he disregarded and disagreed with the hierarchy, he remained convinced that the way forward to deal with conflict was best served by meeting people and listening to each other and talking together. He was often asked to mediate between people, and there are stories abound of the times when he's met with people and worked with solving conflict, arguments, disagreements.
Is it possible that he can be viewed as the patron saint of mediators?
He could be. He was certainly viewed as the patron saint of animals, and actually he was regarded as the patron saint of what do you call those guys that hop on a ship and hide and get a free ride?
Stowaways.
Stowaways. He was the patron saint of stowaways as well.
I thought St. Christopher might have had something to do with that.
No, I think St. Francis got that when he hopped on a boat to go somewhere and hid among the logs in the cargo and was found later. At the same time as he was living in Italy towards the end of the 12th and the early 13th centuries, the Crusades were happening. Islam had spread through many countries, and they were now ruled by the Muslims, where Christianity had previously been dominant. The Christians were losing ground, and knights from England and France were battling the Muslims in Egypt. There's quite a familiar ring to it, doesn't it? You think 8 centuries ago, there were very much the same issues as being faced in the world today. Francis was convinced that if he could go and talk to the Sultan of Damietta, and that was a city on the north coast of Egypt near the delta of the Nile, if he could just go and speak to him, especially if he could converse him, that peace could be established, that the killing would stop, and the Crusades could be brought to an end. Damietta had been a site of conflict repeatedly, and the battle lines were drawn. There had been considerable loss of life on both sides, and the risk was very real. However, somehow when Francis arrived, he was able to make his way through the lines to the Muslim camp. He was passed forward from guard to guard until he was led to the Sultan, Malik al-Kamil. They spent time together talking, and Francis, with his openness and his transparent, charismatic sort of personality, communicated itself to the Sultan. It was over a period of several weeks that al-Kamil developed an affection for Francis and a deep respect for him. Francis challenged the Sultan, and al-Kamil asked Francis to preach to him of the virtues of his God. The Sultan was impressed. He called for a feast to be set before Francis and his companion, and he tried to thrust gifts on him. But Francis declined the gifts because to possess things was not his way. He had no wish to possess anything. He no doubt enjoyed the food, and in the end he did accept one gift, and that was a horn which he promised to use to call his faithful to prayer. Francis and the Sultan parted company. The Sultan was unconverted, but Francis left with a message for the Crusaders, offering a truce and promising the return of Jerusalem to the Christians. It had been won over by the Muslims, and they were promising the return of it. Sadly, it wasn't to be. We wonder what would happen if that had gone ahead. There was a major disagreement in the Crusader camp between the French and the English. That was repeated in history a few times too, wasn't it? The French king sailed back to France, and the battle continued. A siege was mounted against Damietta. Winter came along, and with it came the plague. And the plague killed many more people than the conflict had. And Francis and his companions returned to Italy. Today in Damietta, there is a Franciscan presence in the community of Irish Franciscans. They're living there, driving a proactive interfaith peace project. It's centred on non-violence, reconciliation, and care for the environment. It takes its inspiration from the visit of Francis to Damietta. And it's really active, combining its efforts along with those of non-Franciscans. You know, there's the people, much as we have down at the lounge, really, in a way, where we have church presence and community presence working together. And they're working to take care of the environment and just look for ways of moving peacefully into the future. For us here, I sometimes wonder, how do we then translate something like this into our own lives? And I think it's because, or through, the way we form our relationships with each other, the way we greet people when we see them, the way we open our doors and listen to people. And the way we support other people's initiatives overseas, whether it's by supporting a missionary somewhere or the children's things, the Tia Fund, there's heaps, Oxfam, there's heaps and heaps of these people that are doing such good work overseas in various ways. And as far as I know, there's only one person here that's actually served in Africa over the years. I might be wrong. But we're not all called to go and do things like this. But we are expected to live our lives as Francis expected, to live them fully, to use our talents and our abilities, to just spread that goodwill through the way we behave towards other people.